404, this is 7, stand by a minute. Just come on, what is your attack angle?
Okay, talk to him, see what that did. Charlie Horse, 88.
24, traffic 275.
You sound like you have a good singing voice, though.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. It's at one time it was okay.
All right. So the way I like to start is if you'll give me your name.
Melvin Swanson,
Okay.
Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired.
Awesome. And Mel, how'd you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Grew up on a farm in Iowa.
In Iowa.
Yeah, 60 miles south of Des Moines.
And you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother 5 years older than I.
Okay.
He passed 6 years ago from Alzheimer's. And my mother raised he and I by herself, and went to Leroy Consolidated High School, and there were 11 in my graduating class in 1948. There were only 48 children in the whole high school. Anyway, show you how smart the rest of them were. I was the salutatorian of the class, if you can believe it. But anyway, it was a great life. It was great. It never stunted my growth. And so I figure I came out of it pretty well. Between 48 and 51, when I went in the Air Force, I had 18 jobs, which meant I knew everything. So I went in the Air Force in 1951 to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training. And my drill sergeant came about to my belly button, and he looked up at me and he said, "Swanson, I'm going to have you." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I grew up more in my first 30 minutes in the Air Force than I had in the previous 20 years of my life. And
what made you decide on the military? Was that something you always wanted
I was classified 1A for the draft, and I really wanted to go into the Air Force, and I only had a high school education, but I had an affinity for math, so I ended up in electronics school at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi and got my calculus and trigonometry. And when I went in, you had to have 2 years of formal college to even apply for officer training, cadets, which is 1 year of officer/flying training, or OCS, Officer Candidate School. But as the Korean War went on, they changed the criteria, and if you could pass the 2-year college equivalency GED test, the national test, then you were eligible to take the 18 hours of competitive exams to get into cadets.
Okay.
So I did, and I got in. And when I took the tests, I signed a piece of paper saying I'd take the first class that came along, and it was observer training as opposed to pilot training. So with my electronics background, I ended up as an ECM officer on a B-36, which was the forerunner of the B-52 in SAC.
Okay.
It had 6 reciprocating engines and 4 jets, and I was 190 feet back in the rear of the airplane where we had our equipment. Anyway, I applied for pilot training, and SAC managed to lose my applications on 2 occasions, and I finally got in, and I swore to God I'd never return to SAC. I thought every young officer should spend their first 2 years in SAC, and then they'd appreciate the rest of the Air Force. So I finally got into pilot training in 1956, which was a year of training, and then I became an instructor in jet school at Webb Air Force Base in Big Spring, Texas.
What do you have to do to be an instructor?
You ride in the back seat and hope the student in the front seat doesn't kill you. There's dual controls, of course, and whenever I shook the stick, that meant I have the airplane. You don't have it anymore. But it was rewarding, because to see these young guys that came up from all walks of life that managed to make it through pilot training and go on to like F-100s or F-86s in those days, all the old stuff. And then in '62, I got chosen to be a jet instructor for the Royal Saudi family, Saudi Arabia. And so I went through the military assistance school in Arlington, Virginia, and the day I graduated, King Saud died. And in 1962, everybody was a communist until they proved otherwise. So Faisal took over, so nobody knew what his colors really were. So they canceled my assignment, and they took me over to the Pentagon, and you said, you can go anywhere you want. So I chose England, 20th Tech Fighter Wing. And I was there as a wing staff officer, and I also got to fly the F-100.
Okay.
And
Why did you choose England? Why did you choose England over all the other assignments?
oh, I just always wanted to go there. My wife was absolutely beside herself. She was so happy we were going there. And so we spent 3.5 years there, adopted our daughter there, and she's now 50 and the grandmother of my granddaughter, Fancy, and I have 2 great-grandchildren, Joshua, who will be 3 in December, and Autumn, who will be 1 next month in November. And anyway, and I came back to the States again to the Air Training Command. Once you had that Air Force specialty code on your record, it was almost impossible to get rid of it. And I spent almost 4.5 years at Laredo Air Force Base, and during those 4.5 years, that's how long I was on the volunteer list for Vietnam. So as luck would have it, a guy named Dick Frasato, who worked for me at Laredo, got transferred up to San Antonio to Randolph Air Force Base to officers' assignments. And he got me an assignment to an A-1 Skyraider. So I went from Laredo to Hurlburt Field and went through training there. While there, that was the summer of '69. While I was there, I learned that I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, but I wouldn't pin them on for a year after that. That's the way the Air Force works. That's the way all the military works. So I went to NKP Thailand, knowing that I was going to be promoted in the summertime. So I went out and flew daily missions and a lot of nights out on the trail, getting shot at big time, 37, 57, 85, 100 millimeter. They had it all out there, the North Vietnamese. And we were there to try to kill their trucks, and they were there to try to kill us. So it got a little sticky sometimes. Anyway, Sam Crosby was the wing commander in Nakhon Phanom, and we had this detachment at Da Nang, Vietnam. The commander was rotating home in June, so he asked me if I would like to be the commander there. And it really didn't make any difference whether I'd like to or not. I was going to be the commander. So anyway, I went over and replaced a guy named Pete Williams, and Jim Wold was just before him, and Jim Wold was the one that Don Ingebretson worked for primarily. And I ended up with 12 pilots and 12 airplanes and 60 enlisted men. And we had losses. 4 days after I took over, a guy named Otis Morgan, a major, whose brother, his younger brother, had been killed in Vietnam, couldn't get out of his airplane, and the airplane snap rolled and went into the ground and killed him. So anyway,
It kind of came in on a.
yeah,
I mean,
I had
4 days in,
no
that's kinda tough.
really experienced pilots. Otis got killed. I had to promote a guy named Albro Lundy to operations officer, and then I spent most of my time writing letters to Otis's parents and to his fiancée, who worked in the flight safety office at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia. And it was a good time, but it was a bad time.
Was there a huge difference in going from NKP to Da Nang?
Absolutely. Totally different mission. In the Confidant, almost everything we did was from altitude. Weapons releases were all from like 4,000 feet. Except on search and rescue missions when we were normally called Firefly when I was in the 602nd. But during SARS, search and rescue missions, when we became part of a package of four A1s and 2 helicopters, Jolly Green Giant helicopters. I have their footprints on my back of my party suit, if you'd ever like to look. But anyway, there it got down to the nitty-gritty, and we were down on the ground, almost on the ground, doing whatever was necessary.
In Da Nang?
No, at NKP,
Okay.
in the search and rescue. But that was the only time we really got low, was on search and rescue missions, because we had to make certain that the area was relatively safe for the Jolly Green Giant to come in and hover and drop the penetrator and recover the survivor, and which involves smoke screens, which we set, and there's all kinds of tactics involved in a SAR. So I go to Da Nang and become commander of OLAA, Operating Location Alpha Alpha. And the style of flying was totally different. We flew in a package, which was one of the greatest fighting packages I've ever seen. It would involve the forward air controller, who had an Army Special Forces guy in the back seat to direct fire. However many slicks, Huey helicopter slicks it took to cert the team. And hopefully we got some Huey gunships along with it, and then the 2 A1s and the guys on the ground. That was the fighting package. Ergo, we had to do very low altitude stuff. God, I loved it. It was so fun. It was just, oh man. They were trying to get us and we were trying to get them, and the guys in the ground were screaming, bring it in closer, bring it in closer. And God, your skin crawled, because you don't like to do that for fear you'll have what is called a short round, where you hit a friendly. So anyway, that was the kind of mission we flew. And we set alert every day for that mission. 2-man teams, 2 airplanes, 4 to 6 to 8 airplanes scheduled that day to fly on a 5 minutes notice. So they had to have their cockpits all set up, ready to jump in the airplane. And after the loss of Al Lundy, where he could not get out of the airplane, I told all my crew chiefs that I wanted those belts inspected and make sure all of the connections were correct, because it was very critical. So anyway, that's what we did. Of course, along the line you have losses. A guy who worked for me, he was an old friend from the Air Training Command, Will Van Dusen. He's been dead now these last 15 years, I think. But he had to hold for takeoff because there was an F-4 coming in. We were on an F-4 wing base, okay, Da Nang was. It had probably 50 different missions on that base, different types of aircraft. But anyway, he had to wait quite a while to take off. He takes off, he breaks ground, he gets to 50 feet off the ground and the engine quit. He goes in the airplane. He could have extracted because it was ground zero extraction to get the pilot out of the cockpit. But for some reason he didn't. I see the airplane out there on fire. I'm in my Jeep, and the Marine Corps Fire Department, they were the ones who fought all the fires on the runways at Da Nang. They were on the other side of the base. And the Marine Corps firemen were trying to fight their way up through the wing because the napalm was burning. CBU was going off. I mean, it was a dirty deal. I drive out there and I see it, and I thought I could see Will still in the cockpit, and it just was, I started crying as usual. And I go back to the squadron, and I'm sitting up there at my desk crying, and the phone rings, and I said, "Colonel Swanson," he says, "Mel, this is Will." And I said, "What the hell do you mean this is Will? You're burning alive in an airplane." "No, man," he said, "I ran through the fire, and there was a Marine pickup truck out there that was changing runway controllers. I jumped in, he took me to the dispensary. I called the Marine Corps Fire Department immediately, and I said, "Seize the effort trying to save the pilot. He's alive, he's over in the infirmary." Ended up he had a little burn about this size on his hand because he had one of his gloves off because it was so hot and sticky, and there's no air conditioning in the Douglas A-1 Skyraider. Whatever you can get, ram air is all you get. In any case, so I went over and got him. Well, the motto is, don't let a scared guy stay on the ground. You know what I'm saying? It's like getting bucked off a horse. Get him back on the horse right away. So I got him back airborne in about 2 hours, and everything was fine. Of course, we lost the airplane. So anyway, that happened. And then another time, we were scrambled to insert a team. And when we got our scramble instructions, there were no coordinates. They would say, go to 5,500 feet on the 260 radial of Da Nang TACAN at 48 miles, because a TACAN, Tactical Air Navigation, broadcasts 360 radials. You can pick any heading you want, and there's a radial for that. And it also has DME, distance measuring equipment. So they were usually southwest of us. Troops in contact. So we go do it. Well, on the insertion, the Huey helicopter that had the team on board took a hit, or took several hits, and went in. To make a long story short, one guy survived, and his name was Tony Coelho, I later learned. But we were me and my wingman stayed there till well after dark, and we had no radar or anything in the old A-1. We were delivering ordnance because they had gotten close enough to him to recover his chute. So it got dark though, and we just couldn't do attacks safely. And on my last pass, he said, "Oh, whatever, I won't use the word, you hit me." And a CBU, which is a bomblet that explodes into ball bearings, one of the ball bearings went through the calf of his leg. He says, that's good, you got a lot of them. So anyway, he was carrying a transponder, which is a device, an electronic device that you can pick up on radar and other controlling devices. We scrambled a gunship, an AC-47 or an AC-119, both multi-engine, and they sat up there all night long in 20 meters circle, feeding live ammo in there. He said it was the sweetest music he ever heard. So we got back at first light the next morning, about 4 o'clock. It's still kind of darkish. We thought we might catch the North Vietnamese sleeping, but that didn't work out. But about 3 hours later, we recovered him. We got him. So about a day and a half later or whatever, my chief clerk comes in and he says, Colonel, he says, there's a guy out here who would really like to talk to you. So I said, send him in. And it was Tony Coelho. And he saluted and he says, Colonel, I just wanted to thank you for saving my life. What do you say? So I figured if you saved one guy your entire year, it made the whole tour worthwhile. And then a little later on, one of my guys was coming back from a strike and he had battle damage and he went into the north end of the Ashaw Valley. It was a long story, but to make a long story short, I called the commander of CCM, which is Command and Control North, where the Special Forces operated out of. They were out on China Beach, southeast of Da Nang. I said, we need to get a force to go in there and recover as much of his body as we can tomorrow morning. He said, you bet, you got it. So we got Huey Slicks and 2 A1s and a forward air controller, and we went up to the Ashaw Valley and stayed there about 3 hours and got as much as we could, which wasn't much, but it was something. So anyway, we get back to Da Nang, and I assigned a summary court officer, which you had to do when there was a fatality, to adjudicate things and make sure that everything was done right. About that time, the phone rang, and it was an Army colonel who was up in the Ashaw Valley, and he says, what the hell were you doing in my valley? And I said, geez, I don't know. I didn't see your name on it. And he says, you can't come in here without my approval. And I said, you know what? You need to call CCN, because they go any damn place they want to go. Anytime they want to go. And if you got a problem with that, you take it up with them. Boy, was he hot. He was so mad. I found Army colonels very territorial, but that neither here. Anyway, so we got John's remains sent home and got a replacement pilot for him. Guys kept coming in, and it was a dream assignment. It was like flying in World War II. I mean, we were on the deck. And the old A1, you know, it was like John Cameron Swayze used to say about Timex watches. It'd take a licking and keep right on ticking. And God, it was a fun mission. It really was. And
What did you love about the A1E?
everything. It was just...
Better than a jet?
It rattled, it cranked. I mean, and you know, I'm a fairly big guy, and I used to threaten to go buy a big jar of Vaseline and put on my shoulders so I could get in the damn cockpit. But once I got in and I could roll the rudder pedals out, you know, and I was relatively comfortable. The problem with the A1 was that, being an old airplane, every cockpit was different. So if you're looking for the VHF, the very high frequency radio over here, it may be over here. I mean, that, and
really?
oh
They didn't
yeah.
make them uniform?
No. It was almost as if a shoe cobbler had cobbled out each cockpit, and it was really an amazing airplane. Like I said, it had no air conditioning. On one search and rescue mission, I was in battle for about a little over 4 hours. I lost 7 pounds that day because I flew 2 more times after that. This was when I was at NKP, but it really got difficult. It really got. We carried 2 canteens of water, which lasted about 30, 45 minutes, but you got so involved in the situation, particularly when we were with the recon guys on the ground, and they're the bravest men I ever met.
I don't know. Flying low and slow is kind of nothing to, you know.
Well, that's what they say. So we get into these big arguments of who was the bravest, you know, but especially after a few drinks. But it's.
What did you like about it? You said that was fun, boy. You liked going low and slow. Was it just the thrill of it, or were you kind of scared and you liked that?
Never had time to get scared. The adrenaline, you got to understand what the human body does in situations like that. The adrenaline gets so high, your visual acuity is beyond perfect. Your oral acuity is beyond perfect because you got 3 radios to listen to in the cockpit of the airplane: UHF, VHF, and Fox FM, Fox Mike, where you talk to your wingman, or the guys on the ground, or the forward air controller. You had a switch you had to keep turning to go to the right radio, and you selecting ordnance, and when you're rolling in on the attack, you're jinking like this, right? And you set the gun sight, release the armament, and go off jinking. And then it's your wingman's responsibility to come in and cover your 6 o'clock position. That's what the old saying, check 6, means. Check your 6 o'clock, because there's going to be somebody trying to sneak up your 6 o'clock position. We had rear view mirrors, and one on each side of the cockpit. And the beauty of it was when somebody, their favorite habit was tail firing us as we're going off the target. Well, I could see the muzzle flashes from their guns, and I could stand that thing on a wing and go back and put a nice little can of napalm right on their head and make them sorry they were ever born. But my wingman had come in from 90 degrees and do the same thing. It was, and then you mix in a couple of Huey gunships, and these 19-year-old warrant officers, these 19-year-old kids flying these things, they had more guts than they did brains. But boy, I'm telling you, they'd sit nose to nose with those guys. It was unbelievable. But you get the 2 choppers and the 2 A1s, and we'd set up kind of a whiffer-deal effect, you know, where we're coming in from all directions. And boy, I'll tell you what, the guys on the ground loved that, because it, shall we say, it severely diminished the individual initiative of the enemy. Because they knew if they fired one time, they were going to be dead meat. And we loved that. We loved that. We loved to intimidate. Because we had a big machine, we had lots of ordnance. And the beauty of the A1, it was a dry wing airplane.
What does that mean?
There's no fuel in the wings. The primary fuel tank is behind the cockpit, which is really nice, knowing you got 400 gallons of jet fuel, of gas, avgas back there, and then you got a 300-gallon centerline tank that's hung under the airplane on the centerline of the fuselage. So anyway.
Well, I know the guys on the ground loved you because you could stay on station forever.
Oh yeah,
too, with all that fuel.
Yeah, we could stay on. You know, I guess I shouldn't use any vulgarity on this, but you know, the fast movers, the jets. We called them the one-pass haul-ass guys. One pass and they're out of there. We make one pass and then we probably have 10 or 12 or 13 or 14 more to make, because the CBU was a triangular shaped canister that had 6 tubes. Okay. In each of those tubes were 12 CBU bomblets. So you could go in and you could puke out 1 bomblet at a time, or 1 tube at a time, or 2 tubes at a time. And so you had 6 stations with CBU on them. The airplane had 12 mounting stations for armament. And you could stay there forever spitting out ordnance. And the guys on the ground loved it. They really did. And then on the inboard pylons underneath the airplane, we had 7.62 miniguns, which could fire 8,000 rounds a minute. And boy, you could really put some hate on those guys with those things. And then we had 2 420-millimeter cannon. So, you know, we were pretty well protected. That does not imply that we didn't take hits. We took a lot of them. We took a lot of them. But most of which could be patched up. And Neil Melton, this civilian guest that's here with us, he and his wife Rhonda are here at our request. He owns an A1 at Tennessee Air Museum in Knoxville that all of us have flown combat in. Isn't that cool?
That's very cool.
Don Engebretson and I'll get off of the subject for a second, but Don Engebretson and I went down, and a couple of other guys went down there on D-Day. He had a special air show that day, and he was going to fly the airplane. And God, I'm telling you, it was when we heard him start that engine and that blue smoke came out of there. There's nothing more beautiful than the A1 engine starting. It's just, it gave you such a feeling of power. And like, bring it on. I'll take you on. Anytime you want to go, let's go. So that was the way, and that was the attitude my guys had.
Well, that was gonna be my next question, is you got a powerful airplane and you got some guys that'll take some risks. So, Commander, what's it like riding herd on these guys?
Tough. It's tough. These kids were all full of themselves. They were all very positive that they knew everything there was to know about flying combat. And those who think they know everything deeply disturb those of us who do. So we had some, shall we say, some attitude adjustment hours, but morale was so high. The morale of my guys was so high. And it was, I was not going to allow anybody to be negative. If you weren't positive around me, you better have a damn good reason. And they all were. I don't know what they did all night long. I didn't care. But they better be ready to fly the next morning. For example, I had this young man whom I'm going up to St. George, Utah to visit his wife, who flew for me in Vietnam, Gary Hawes, and he got killed in May in an aircraft accident in a Cessna 150 after all the combat missions he had flown and the U-2 mission that he flew, which was highly dangerous. And then to lose his life in a bug smasher like that was beyond belief. So Don Engebretson and Linda and I are going up and see Mrs. Hawes. I don't know. just to tell just to let her know what a great American he was. He reported in, I think in August of 70, or maybe early September, whatever. He's a devout Mormon. He had rigged up an 8mm movie camera that he could clamp on to the glare shield that covered the instrumentation so he could take pictures of what he was doing all throughout the flight. But anyway, so when he came in and he asked to talk to me, and I said, sure, come on in. He comes in and reports in, and he said, sir, he says, I'm Mormon, and he said, if there is any feasible way that you can not schedule me on Sunday, I'd appreciate it. I said, we'll honor that request as much as we possibly can. However, if the mission demands it, you're going to fly. And he says, fair enough. And boy, did he fly. He was one of the best wingmen I'll ever have. And he was a wonderful young person. He really was. And
what's your favorite memory of him back then?
His devotion to duty. The mission came first, always. Anybody who didn't think that didn't last long. I'd send them back to NKP and let them feel, pat them around, whatever. But the mission had to come first. And the reason it did, because our brothers were out there in trouble. And it was our responsibility to get them out, or to at least assist in getting them out. Right. There were no I did this or I did that. It was always we did this and we did that, because every segment of the team contributed. Sure. The forward air controller, the back seat rider, and the forward air controller, who was a special forces guy with extensive experience on the ground. Mm-hmm. And the guys on the ground, the Huey slick drivers, the Huey gunnery ships, everybody contributed. It was kind of a marvelous thing to see. And in so doing, we earned a lot of medals, but the two that CCN gave me at my going away party were the ultimate medals. They're plaques. Mm-hmm. They don't even give them to some of their guys. And for me to get both of them, I felt so honored. So anyway.
Well, that must have been a wild party.
Oh, yeah, it got a little tough. It was a wonderful experience. We had one special mission called Tailwind, which CNN picked up on 25 years later and tried to intimate that some poison stuff was dropped. Whatever, I don't care what CNN thinks. But
was Peter Arnett?
Yeah, no, it was Robin somebody, the woman.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, she was totally erroneous and proven so, mm-hmm. and got fired. And we all smiled about that. And
so what was Tailwind?
It was a very major effort. There was a large plain just west of the Mekong in Laos that went on for miles and miles. And on the far west end of that, the CIA had a post that was going to be very possibly overran by North Vietnamese regulars, because this was in September of 1970, and there were a lot of North Vietnamese regulars in southern Laos. So the thesis was to get a recon team in there, which we did, a big one, like 60 guys. Went in with 3 Marine helicopters, dropped them off, and for 3.5 days we were flying max effort. I mean, we'd come home, turn around, go right back again. And NKP contributed assets also, because it was actually more than we could handle with only 12 airplanes. But anyway, it was a wonderful, and they succeeded. They kicked the North Vietnamese butts very, very badly.
And so you just provided air support.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So how long, because we're talking Western Light, what kind of flying time are you talking about from Da Nang to?
Oh, probably, it was about 40 minutes, 40 or 45, yeah.
That's not bad. So
Yeah.
they had a lot of time on station.
Oh yeah,
You've got to fly
oh yeah.
back and refuel.
But as soon as you started getting low on fuel, we had another pair on their way. So that we provided close air support, very close air support for them during the entire time from first light to last. Go home, grab a little bit of sleep, a few shots of Jim Beam, and go back the next morning.
So you guys were rotating pairs in and out?
Oh yeah,
Just one?
yeah. And the guys, the kids that do the airplanes, they armed them and checked the oil, and you know, it's got nearly 40 gallons of oil in the engine. I mean, it's a big engine. And rearming the airplanes, and God, hot, 95 degrees, and just sweating their tails off, and every one of them grinning. That's the beauty. That is the beauty. Not one whimper out of any of them. Juan Urrutia, who was a master sergeant, who was my line chief, was out there, and boy, he said, "Get at it, let's get this done." And boy, we got it done. And we got a letter from, you remember General Westmoreland, Chief of Staff of the Army at the time, which made him a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we got a classified letter from him saying what a wonderful job we did, and I read that to the guys, and they were just beaming, you know, the whole detachment. It's really quite nice. It's very nice. And we got, as a result of that, our unit got awarded the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, which is pretty good.
Now,
All in all, it was a great tour, a marvelous tour. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I wanted to take you back a little bit. We talked about this before we started taping, with how young these guys were.
Yeah.
And you were getting a lot
Right out of pilot training.
Right out of pilot training, they've got maybe 500 hours. How do you get a guy up to speed? Because wasn't that part of your job if you got sent with pilots?
Yeah.
So how do you get this guy up to speed and teach him what he's going to have to do, and what if he's coming from NKP and he's like, I don't think I want to do this low and slow stuff. I mean, you had a lot of training or a lot of decisions to make with these guys coming in, didn't you?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you just take them out and go, okay, this is how we fly low and slow?
Yeah. The first flight in country's on my wing. Me or my ops officer, or one of my experienced leads, which I had very few of. And Yeah.
And one flight, you can
And
usually size up?
the metal of the man would always come out or show itself during the course of the mission. If the guy showed the slightest inclination of not wanting to go low and slow and get down and dirty, then you wrote him up when you got back and you counseled him and you said, you are going to do whatever your lead tells you to do. Your progress there is going to be determined by your attitude and how well you take it, and your development of skills. These guys worked hard. They worked really hard because they wanted to be a lead. You see, the old A1 is nothing, there's no other airplane like it anywhere. These guys were all taught in tricycle gear airplanes. That's a nose gear and the main landing gear. Well, the A1's a tail dragger. And it has two radials of 16 cylinders back to back, 32 cylinders, and 2,800 horsepower. And so when you push the throttle full forward for takeoff, you have 7 degrees of right rudder trim in to counteract the torque, plus full right leg to keep it aligned on center line down the runway on takeoff. That engine could get you in deep, serious trouble if you didn't know it and respect it. These guys knew it. They respected it. And, you know, it was just, it was so fun to watch them develop. And it was such a great source of pride to me when we'd get calls from the recce guys. God, you guys saved my ass today. And they're coming up to us at this convention and telling us the same thing. You're the reason we've got grandchildren, you know. What do you say?
I don't know that there is anything you can say.
Well, no, there isn't. You just say thank you. Thank you for what you did. I don't know whether I would have guts enough to jump out of a Huey helicopter into elephant grass 8 feet high and not know what else was in there. Man, these guys were brave men. Brave men. Huh.
So how long were you in Da Nang?
I was there about 4.5 months, and then I went back to NKP in November, and they put another guy in there to get some command experience. There were some difficulties there that I'd prefer not to discuss if you don't mind. Really has no bearing on the problem. But anyway, so I finally came home on the 17th of December in 1970, and I was sitting at the bar in the San Francisco International Airport, and I recalled from my times in and out of there how good their Bloody Marys were. And I was sitting there in my uniform and, you know, had my ribbons on and all that, and having that beautiful Bloody Mary, and this hippie comes up and sits down beside me. And he said, so, you been to Vietnam? And I said, yes, I have. And he said, you been over there killing all those innocent civilians? And I said, yes, I have. And I said, I'll tell you another thing. I'm going to add one more to my total if you aren't off that bar stool in 10 seconds. You can't tell me. I said, you're wasting valuable time, pal. You're going to be on the floor, and I'm going to be kicking the hell out of you. He gets up and leaves, and this huge black hand comes down on my shoulder, and I look up, and it's Nate Thurman, who played for the San Francisco Warriors. 6'10", 285, had hams like Yeah. He said, Colonel, I thought you handled that real well. If you hadn't hit the SOB, I was going to. So we sat and had a couple of drinks, and then I went home to my family. And then a week later, Christmas Eve, I received a call from NKP that Al Lundy, my ops officer, had gone in an airplane. So that took all the joy out of Christmas and left a grieving widow and 6 daughters. But you know what? There's anybody who is naive enough to go into a combat environment and not anticipate or expect losses, better rethink the problem, because they're going to happen. It just happens. You can go out here on I-215 tomorrow and lose your life. So, granted, the bullets flying through the air does make it a little more dodgy. But I always looked at it this way, and I always told my guys this: always respect your enemy, because they are very crafty, they're very bright, they're very well trained. They're experts at intrigue, setting traps, and things of that nature. So anyway, respect your enemy. May the best man win. That's it. So if you're here to talk about it, that's pretty darn good. I'm about out of words.
I was going to ask you if you had anything else. I thought we were coming to kind of a natural stop.
Just thank God for everybody in uniform. God bless.